Good morning, everybody. This is Rich Redicup. Welcome to Dahlias Demystified Part 2. In Part 2, we're going to talk about taking care of your dahlias here in southeastern Washington. As a quick review, in Part 1, we planted tubers and learned about tuber science. Our star of our show was number 60, Ivanetti, and I'm sure you're just dying to know what Ivanetti has been doing. Well, Ivanetti took off like a Falcon rocket. He turned on the gas, and the gas poured into that chute, and that chute headed for the sun. It bounced off a rock. It bounced off a piece of bark. It bounced off a phosphate ion. It bounced off a piece of phosphorus. It hit my stake, and finally it poked through the soil, where it unfolded its leaves and absorbed energy from the sun. Now that journey took 30 days. 30 days? Yes, 30 days for 2 inches. Well, that's not quite a Falcon rocket, but you know Ivanetti. He's pretty darn slow. So let's talk about what the tubers have been doing since Part 1. Well, they've all been coming up, all at different times. So don't get nervous if you've got tubers that aren't up yet. Be patient and wait. I had 3 tubers come up yesterday, and I still have a few that haven't poked through the ground yet. And if you get real nervous, you can go dig and check out the tuber, being careful not to damage it, and put it back in the soil if it looks fine. Okay, dahlia care. There are 6 things that I'd like to talk about in dahlia care this morning, and we'll go through them one by one. Watering. Okay, there's a lot of ways you can water your dahlias. You can put up drip irrigation, and that is what I use. I used to use single emitters on each dahlia plant, and I decided I did not like that. The emitters were always moving as I got in and worked around in the dahlia patch, and so I have now gone through micro drip line, which has emitters every 6 inches, and I run those lines down the rows, one on either side of the dahlias. And then I've connected those to funny pipe, and I love these quick connectors. In the fall, I can take the connector and pull it apart and roll up these drip lines and store them in the shed, and then go out and dig my tubers up. Okay, so many systems, you can use soaker hoses, about anything you choose to do. The next most important thing is how much to water. Well, we didn't water at tuber planting because we didn't need it. But now that the sun is out and the sprouts have gone up, you need to water. I typically water once every 3 days with an automatic system on my drip line. As it gets warmer, I'll go to every other day. Hotter yet, I'll go to every day. And when we get one of those real blaster days when it's 110 degrees or 115, I'll actually take an old-fashioned sprinkler, ring sprinkler like this, and set it in the middle of my patch and basically flood the garden. Don't worry about rot. The flooding will take care of your dahlias. And the other thing that I've learned from a friend is when it's really hot and the soil is still wet, I'll go out and I'll mist my dahlias with a little tool like this that you put on the end of a garden hose, and it shoots out a really fine spray. The dahlias seem to like the cooling effect, and they just do fine. Staking. Dahlias need to be staked, especially the tall ones. It's not so important for the shorter ones, but the tall ones will blow over in the wind. And we have a lot of wind here where I live. The wind comes up from the south, it blows up towards Badger Mountain, and it can just blow like the dickens. So I've had to adapt my staking methods. You remember when we planted Ivanetti, we put a stake in like this. A lot of dahlia growers will start with that first stake being a tall stake. A single stake like this in the ground, and then they can take and tie their tubers to that stake. I did not think that was strong enough for my particular application here in back 40, so I've come up with modified tomato cages. Now this is a small one. I'll show you a bigger one, the ones I use when we go out and tour the garden, but it's just concrete reinforcing wire. I think these are a 6-inch space, bent into a circle and looped over, and I've gone ahead and painted mine so they're camouflaged, but this seems to work really well for me. The dahlias grow up, they can grow out through the spaces, you can tuck them back in, and the way I install them, the wind does not blow my cages over. Pests. I have three kinds of pests I do battle with in the back 40. Number one, slugs. Now, it's not a real problem for me because of how I've got the retaining walls on either side of my dahlia bed, but they do come in from the end. You can use different kinds of slug bait. Make sure you get one that's approved by the WSU program and is approved for use in the state of Washington. I don't like to use slug baits because I have pets, and slug baits are harmful to pets. So what I've gone to is barriers. Now everybody has one of these. That's just a black pot. I take and cut the bottom off and then just stick it in the soil, and the slugs don't get to my dahlias when I've got the barriers around them. The second problem that I have, and it's one I'm battling right now, and I am really frustrated with this one. Maybe some of you have a good idea on how to treat it, is grasshoppers. For some reason, the grasshoppers love to come into my dahlia fields, and they will nip out that very tender center growing bud and basically set your dahlia back for a loop, in some cases killing it. Well, what do you do about a grasshopper? Well, I have resorted to the comic strip BC approach. There's a character in that comic strip that hates snakes. I think you know who I'm talking about. And she goes out and beats the crap out of the snakes. Well, I go out in the morning, and if I see a grasshopper, out comes the hoe, out comes a stick, and I chase them all over the garden until I get rid of them. I'm a little bit worried that the funny farm is going to come looking for me because of my behavior, but that's what I use for grasshoppers. Manual swatting them like a BC person with a club. Spider mite control. This is really difficult, okay? The best thing I can tell you to do is to go to HortSense or PestSense on the WSU extension sites, read up about spider mite control, and then use one of their recommendations on how to try to control the spider mites. There are chemicals you can use, but make sure you get one that's WSU approved. Let's move into weeds. We are now at the point where we should stop hoeing our dahlias. And the reason is the dahlia is now putting out a lot of feeder roots. You do not want to damage those feeder roots. So from this point on, I'm sorry, it's all hand weeding. I currently have not done a lot of mulching. A lot of dahlia growers do, but you can try mulch. I would just stay away from grass clippings. You don't know what kind of chemicals are on your grass, even if you did the fertilization. And I don't want to take a chance with putting any chemicals on my dahlias. So from this point on, it's hand weeding. I'm sorry, but that's what you got to do. Feeding. It's important to feed your dahlias during the summer months. Now I know what you're going to say. Rich says he doesn't use commercial fertilizers on his dahlias when he plants them. That's true, but I do feed my dahlias during the summer. Now all of the publications you read will talk about using low nitrogen fertilizer with small amounts of potassium and phosphorus. The nitrogen is for the plant to grow and be green, and the other two elements are primarily for causing large blooms. People over in the coast like to use fish fertilizer to start with, and then they use different kinds of granular fertilizer, Osmocote, etc., that are pretty much low nitrogen, and the other elements are very high ratio either. I think if you use any of those kind of methods on your dahlias, you're going to be just fine. I grow my dahlias in the same spaces year after year, and so I need to be concerned about chemical concentration. And I've had to adjust my fertilizing practices based on soil science. So if you haven't, I'd encourage you to get a soil analysis and know what is in your soil, and then you will know what you need to feed your dahlias. Stopping, new term. You could also call it pinching. When your dahlias get to where they have 2 or 3 or more sets of leaves, most dahlia growers go out and they pinch out the center section of the dahlia. And I'll show you how to do this when we go out into the back 40. The reason for doing that is that diverts all the growth to the lateral leaves and gives you more stems to have blooms on. It also gives you a much bushier plant. If you don't do that, that center stem will shoot straight up, it'll get very tall, and you will get just a few flowers. And what we want is a lot of flowers. So we stop or pinch the center section of the dahlia out. Now, it sounds pretty mean, but dahlia growers do it all over the world. I finally got convinced to do it when I went to Swan Island Dahlias, and the grower there told me that he took a tractor and went out and mowed his fields down to stop his dahlias. All right, everybody. Now we're out in Dahlia Flats, and I'm going to try to run through the video portion fairly quickly since the tabletop took so long. This is Ivanetti, number 60. Number 60 tuber was the one on the left. He was the first one to come up, and his brother on the left came up about 3 days later. They're not very tall right now. If you look over adjacent to this other plant, you can see it is huge compared to Ivanetti, but that's the way tubers grow, some faster than others. Okay, now we got a quick shot of my drip irrigation system. There's just two laterals off the sides and a piece of drip line about 10 foot long running on either side of the row of dahlias. In the fall, I disconnect the quick couplers there in the center and just roll that up and put it in the shed, and it's ready to go next year. The other thing I like is if I have emitters that get plugged in this drip line, I just cut off the whole section and replace it with brand new. So easy peasy, and it works for me. Okay, here you can see at the end of my garden where I have slug control going on. 3 of those pots inserted in the soil. That protects the dahlias until they get big enough where I think they can make it on their own. Okay, we're going to stop or pinch a dahlia. You can see this dahlia's got several sets of leaves. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And after the 6th one, guess what? There come those buds. There's actually 2 or 3 on this one, but they will be the ones that take all energy. So what we want is we want buds to come out of all these lateral leaves. So we just go in and just go snip, ouch! I took the bud off, and that dahlia will now get bushy. Same thing on this one. You can see here, this is a splitter. I'm going to go down a little bit lower. Snip! Okay, now he will get bushier and put out many more blooms. So I've just put 2 of my dahlia cages on the 2 dahlias in front of the camera. You can see they're just made out of concrete reinforcing wire made in a loop. I think there's 8 squares is the size I've came up with. And I made them that size because that's about the spacing between the dahlias, and the cages can be adjacent. And I normally go back in after I got them all in place and zip tie them cage to cage. So that gives me a very secure method for staking the dahlias. On lower plants, I use a shorter cage. Bigger plants, I use a taller cage. Pretty straightforward. I like it, except I don't like the issue of where to store the cages when you're done in the fall. Buddy, that brings this video to a close. I hope you learned something through it, and stand by for part 3, which will be dahlias in bloom. Have a nice day. Thank you for watching.